Hello everyone, thanks for joining this session. Today I'm going to cover some of the Visual Studio Code tips for the Salesforce developers. I'm also going to cover some of the tips which we probably know but ignore most of the times. In any case, these tips will be helpful to productively build the applications on Salesforce platform. So let's get started. I'm Satya Sekhar, Senior Developer Evangelist working with APAC Developer Relations team, and you can reach me on Twitter as Satya SFDX. In this session, we might be talking about a few of the things which are forward looking. So if you are planning to make any purchase decisions, please base your decisions only on what are currently available on the platform. If you have not yet done, you can subscribe to our Telegram channel to keep a tab on what's happening and what is latest in the world of Salesforce developers. You can also follow us on Twitter as @SalesforceDevs and subscribe to our Facebook and YouTube channels as Salesforce developers. These days we are working on some quick takes which are like 5 to 7 minute videos which provide bite-sized content to learn a feature in a video. So stay tuned with our Salesforce developers channel. And let me also remind you that this session is being recorded and we'll provide the recording on the same page from where you have registered for this session. We'll also keep you posted on when the recording will be available through our Telegram channel. If you see any lag in my session, either in video or audio, most of the times that will be fixed if you can refresh your page. In today's session, first I'll start with the Salesforce development process. What a Salesforce developer do in his day-to-day developer activity. And then we'll identify each of the segments. For those segments, we'll list down the tips and tricks and discuss those things. We'll also see the demos wherever possible. So I'll be covering the tips for the Visual Studio Code and also Salesforce DX, scratch orgs, development, that is coding, testing, debugging, all the things. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's understand the Salesforce development process using the Salesforce DX, and then we'll list out some of the most important tips and tricks that can be adopted at each of the phases of the development. In a typical development activity, a Salesforce developer can build application using the development environment, which can include developer console or an external IDE. VSCode is my personal preference, and the Salesforce developers are encouraged to use it as this editor is lightweight and easily extensible. As you all know, Salesforce has created an extension pack which has all the necessary tools to build applications on this platform. It has Salesforce CLI integration and supports Apex, Visualforce, Aura, LWC, etc. So the first most known tip is install the Salesforce extension pack. Now, the Salesforce developer can build the application locally on his computer. In the process, developer creates a SFDX project, writes code, tests the code, and if there is error, he can also debug the code. Once a piece of work is done, he can push the source code to the scratch org and test the application's functionality. Not only that, developer can also create automations like workflows and processes in the scratch org and pull those changes to the local environment. This is one tip I'm probably leaking, but it's absolutely fine. The next thing the Salesforce developer does is he pushes the code into the source repository and secure the code there. In this case, there is no possibility of unintentionally overwriting the code, which can happen in the org-based development. At any point of time, we can also check out the code and deploy it to the sandbox or deploy it to the production org. Although we can also migrate the changes from the sandbox to the production org using the change sets. We'll now see the tips and tricks for each of these phases. We'll cover a couple of tips related to the VS Code in general, but I'll cover most of the VS Code tips during each of the phases, and I'll also cover the productivity extensions exclusively towards the end of the session. First, we'll see some of the tips that will help you organize the project efficiently and set up the configuration for your development process in VS Code. I love VS Code because it is highly extensible by installing extensions. I keep trying the new extensions whenever I find time. This results in a lot of extensions in my VS Code instance. It even becomes difficult to manage those extensions. But there is an easy way to manage. You can filter the extensions to see which extensions are installed, which needs to be updated, and which can be enabled or disabled. We'll see that in a short demo. Here I am in the Visual Studio Code environment where you can see a welcome file, and on the left side in the activity bar, when you click on this icon, it is going to open up a marketplace for extensions where you can probably search for an extension, say Salesforce, and it lists all the extensions related to the Salesforce. And if you see, it's basically a clutter of extensions. We don't know which particular extension needs to be updated, which has to be which is not yet installed, which is outdated, so on and so forth. So the easy way, as I said, is filtering out. It can be done using @ symbol here. When you type @ symbol, it is going to show you all the possible filters. You can filter out the built-in extensions or the extensions which are disabled, enabled. For instance, let me click on install. It shows all the installed extensions here. We can further filter it by typing the search term. Let us say Salesforce. In this case, now you can see all the extensions which are installed and which are related to Salesforce. This is one tip which I follow most of the times. But there is another tip which I ignored for ages and then realized that it's an important tip. That is the welcome page. If you see welcome page, you have various sections here. First, we have the start section where you can create the new file or open folder, add workspace folder. What's so great about it? It's all common, right? Fine. It also has some recent files which you can open, and it also has some help section where some of the menu items from the actual help menu are listed, in which there are some items which are really important, like tips and tricks, introductory video. You can go and watch those things. But what is most important is this right side section where you have a customize section and a learn section. Assume you are a new developer and started using the Visual Studio Code for the very first time. You want to get acquainted to the interface. What you can do is just click on this interface overview. It shows the complete overview of the interface. It lists all the extensions in the activity bar. It shows what we have in our status bar at the bottom. It also shows where you can type your commands. That is the command palette. It also has something called as interactive playground. If you click this, it is going to open up a documentation. It's not just a documentation, but it has a inbuilt playground. So one of the favorite things for most of the developers who use Visual Studio Code is multi-cursor editing. So if you click this, it will take you to the section where it gives the description about the multi-cursor editing. You can also notice that it shows the shortcut keys which are more relevant to the Mac operating system here. That is because I'm using the Mac operating system. If you are using Windows, it shows the description with respect to the Windows operating system. Now I can click my Option key on Mac or Alt key on Windows and click anywhere here in my example. So it is going to select that line. In fact, I can select multiple lines and then do a multi-line editing all at once. It is going to be really helpful in your real-time coding. This is one tip. Likewise, you can find more tips here on how to use IntelliSense, how to do an action on a line at a time, so on and so forth. One of my most interested tip here is to use the emits. So emits are kind of short form with which you can create the skeletal code for your HTML or JavaScript file. Here you can create a unordered list which has a list item, which uses the item class, CSS class, and you have such 5 list items like repeated for 5 times. Or let me create a very simple example. I want to create a unordered list which has list items which are to be repeated for 5 times, and just press enter. It creates a skeletal code for you where you can type all that information, like whatever you want to fill in this. You can just press a tab and you can keep filling that information there. Okay, now that we have covered some of the Visual Studio Code tips, and if you go back to the welcome page, there is one last thing which I want to show. You can use the color themes. So when you click on that, it's going to launch the command palette, and then you can see what are the different color themes that are suitable. You can also install new color themes there and then use those things. And not only that, you can also use the key bindings. If you are coming from some other tool like say force.com IDE, if you want to use those shortcuts here, you can just click this. It is going to launch your market extension place, and then it shows all the key maps that are available. Maybe you want to install the Eclipse key map and use those shortcut keys. So these are the different things that I have covered. So we have covered the interactive playground, we have covered the filter extensions, and then one thing which I want to show here is the Zen mode and centered layout. This is one interesting tip. If you go back here, you can run the Zen mode. You can open the command palette. Let me open the command palette, and you can type Zen mode here, or you can use the shortcut key Command K Z for Mac or Control K Z for Windows. When you toggle the Zen mode, you are going to see your source code in the full screen mode. You can also toggle it back by using the same set of keys. And then the second thing I want to show here is center mode. So if you use the toggle center layout, it will show your source code. Currently I am in a document, but when you see source code is visible in the PDF format. So whenever you are referring to the source code of some other developer, this will be a helpful feature where you can refer to the source code as if you are reading a PDF document there. Okay, so what's the next tip? You might have noticed sometimes, if you already worked on Salesforce DX project using the Visual Studio Code, whenever you create projects, sometimes you might have noticed that in the command palette, some of the SFDX commands are missing. If something happens like that, you can run a command called developer reload window in the command palette, which is going to reload the complete environment. So that way you are going to see all your missing SFDX commands. So what next? We are going to see the tips and tricks for the Salesforce DX project. So the first tip is which kind of project template to use when you create the project. If you go back here to Visual Studio Code and create a Salesforce DX project, you can see that there are 3 options. You have analytics if you are working on web analytics project, but if you are working on all other projects, whether to go for an empty project template or a standard project template. So what is the difference? In empty project template, it is going to create minimal folders, and in standard project template, it is going to create the possible folders that you might be using. So let's select standard project template for now, and let us give a name, say standard 1, and save it. Here you can see that it has created a Salesforce DX project structure for you, and Force app is the folder where you store all your metadata information, maybe applications, maybe some classes or content. So you can see that all these folders are currently empty. we don't know which folders we are going to use. Say, if you are working on, say, Lightning Web Components project and you don't want to use any of the other components there, then better delete this folder. Similarly, you can delete all other folders which you will not be using in your project to keep your repository clean. So that is the best option. So that is the very first tip related to the Salesforce DX project. On Salesforce platform, we can build the applications using two different approaches. One is the org-based approach, the other one is the source-driven approach. In source-driven approach, the source of truth is your repository. But in the org-based approach, the source of truth can be any of your orgs, primarily the production org. In order to retrieve the metadata from the production org to your local system, you can use the package.xml. But there is another easy way, that is the org browser extension, with which you can retrieve the data without using the package.xml. So let's see that in a demo here. Now let's again create a new project. This time we'll use the empty project template to understand the differences between the standard project template and the empty project template. So let's give the name as org-based demo. And let's save it in some location. If you examine the folder structure for the empty project, here you can see that it has created only two folders. It has not created so many folders this time. Okay, so now we want to retrieve the data from the org. So let's set one of our production orgs, in our case we'll use the developer edition, to retrieve the data from. So to do that, you can use the Salesforce CLI or you can use the command palette. So you can click on the bottom here, no default org set, which is going to launch the command palette with the command run for setting the default org. Now let us say I'll select this org as my default org. So it has set that org as default. It has run successfully. And if you go and examine the activity bar, here you can see that we have a new icon, which is the org browser icon. So let's click that icon, which is going to retrieve all the metadata from that specific org. Now, whichever metadata you want to retrieve into your local development environment, you can do that. So for instance, let me get a controller from my Apex classes into local environment. So here you can see the contact list controller, and there is an icon which is a kind of download from the cloud icon. If you click this, it is going to retrieve that data into your local project. And now that it is completed, let's go back and examine our project folder structure once again. Now here you can see that it has created the classes folder in which it has retrieved the contact list controller.class. Okay, so what's the next tip? Understand the .ignore files. When you created a standard template project, you would have noticed that there are some kind of .ignore files like git.ignore file and force.ignore file, and similarly ESLint and the prettier ignore files. So these are the files which should never be ignored. Okay, so what are these files meant for? When you add a particular file type in these files, for instance, you don't want to commit one of the files, then you can put that in the .ignore file. Similarly, you can name one of the files in your force ignore which should not be pushed to your org. You can use these files to ignore the files which should not be handled. And one last option which I want to talk about, the last tip in the SFDX project, is related to the source-driven development. Whenever we work on source-driven development, we create the project. Once we create the project, we set one of the orgs as the default dev org, or we authenticate one of the org as the default dev org in order to create the scratch orgs. We will repeat the same steps for every project that we create. But if we are going to use the same dev org to create scratch orgs for different projects, why not set the default dev org once so that it will be available for all the projects? That can be done by launching the command palette. Let's launch the terminal here, and in the terminal you can type the command SFDX config, or even before that, let us see the list of orgs. So I typed SFDX force org list, and here you can see that no org is currently set as the default DevHub org. So we can set one of the org as the default DevHub org. So we can use default DevHub username equal to DevHub. So this is the one I wanted to use, so I'll use that here. Let us call it as DevHub. Fine. This is the command that we can use, but if you use the -G option, which stands for global, it is going to set that org as a global DevHub org. So whenever you create the project the next time, this org will be available as the default DevHub org for you. So now if you go and see SFDX force org list once again, you can see that this org is set as the default DevHub org. You can see the D symbol here. Now whenever you create the project, for that project you can use this org as the default DevHub org. That's great. Now what next? We are going to see the tips and tricks related to the scratch org. It's always a good practice to create the scratch org definition in such a way that the scratch org will be easily manageable. Some tips for creating the scratch orgs are: you can change the org name so that you can easily identify the scratch org. And the second tip is you can mention the admin email in the scratch org definition file. This helps you whenever there is some problem with the scratch org, an email is sent to this specified email. Otherwise, the email is sent to the mail that is registered in the DevHub org. And third important tip I want to mention here is you can use a parameter called hasSampleData in your scratch org configuration definition file to populate your scratch org with some sample data. Normally, whenever you create the scratch org, it is not populated with the data. One option is to use the tree API and export the data from some other org and then import the data into your scratch org. But the best practice here is, again, if you want the sample data, you can use hasSampleData feature. Now let's go ahead and create a project. Let us call it as let's take the standard project and call it as source driven development demo. Source driven demo. Okay, and let's save it. Here, if you open the config folder, you can find the project scratch definition.json. So let's close this. Here you can change the org name as a meaningful name. Let us call it as source driven demo org. And then we can also give an admin email. So you can say admin email and give some email like some mail at something.com. I don't want to reveal my email address there, so I'm giving something in the email format, but you give the genuine email there. And then you can add the description so that it fills up more information to easily identify your scratch org. So I can say VSCode tips demo, so that I can easily identify the scratch org. And not only that, I was also talking about one of the important parameters called hasSampleData, and you can set it to true. And that's it. Let's save that. Now we are ready to create the scratch org, and you can also verify if the DevHub org is still available there for you by using the SFDX force org list command. And here you can see that the DevHub is available, so we can go ahead and click on no default org set, and we can create a default scratch org. We'll use the project scratch org definition file, and let's give some demo as a source driven scratch. Okay, and you can keep it to 7 days. That's absolutely fine. And once the scratch org is created, you can open the scratch org and you can see that the sample data is available. You can see that the scratch org is successfully created. So let's go ahead and open the scratch org. Let's open the sales app. And here you can go to say contacts page and see all the contacts. Now you should be able to see the data here. It is populated automatically. What next? You can also generate and reuse the password if you want to share the scratch org with one of your colleagues or other developers. You can also delete the scratch org, and the best practice is if you are not using the scratch org, you always delete the scratch org so that it will be, you can create more scratch orgs for your future projects. Okay, and this can be done, this can all be done using your SFDX commands. And one more option which I want to talk about is you can enable the deploy on save. This is one more tip. If you enable deploy on save, whenever you make the changes to your project structure or your programs there and save it, it will be automatically be deployed. The other option is you can use the local development. And when you use the local development, you can dynamically see the changes in the local development server. That's all about the scratch org tips. Let's see what's next. Next, we are going to see the tips related to coding. Coding tips really make the developer efficient and effective. So let's start with our very first coding tip. You can use the breadcrumbs to easily navigate between the files. Now let's go ahead to our Visual Studio Code where I have already got my LWC recipes app. So let's see how we can navigate. For instance, I want to go to a particular file. I can go to Force app, go to LWC directory, or I can use Command P for Mac or Control P for Windows, and I can search for a particular method. Say I want to open apex imperative method.js. Okay, I opened the file apex imperative method.js. Now how do I go to the HTML file? So one option is on the left side, you can go and search for the apex imperative method and go to the HTML file. But this is not really so efficient way to navigate. So what we can do is we can open our settings here. Let me open command comma. In fact, I can also close this sidebar. I can use the shortcut key there. I can use Command B for Mac or Control B for Windows. I closed it. And now I open the settings. Here I can search for breadcrumb. Okay, so here you can see that breadcrumbs is currently not enabled. So let's enable it and let's go back to our apex imperative method.js. Now here you can see at the top the breadcrumb, and you can easily navigate between the files. You need not even open the Explorer. When I click this apex imperative method.js, it shows all other files that are relevant to this component. I can easily navigate to the HTML file, and from the HTML file I can easily navigate the metadata file. Great. So what's the next tip? Next tip is we can use the code lens, folding, and light bulb. So whenever let's see the code code length first. So here, when we are working on some JavaScript file, if that method is being used at multiple locations, how do I know that where is this method being used? So one option is to go to settings again, and then you can search for the code lengths, and here you can enable the editor code lengths. Once you do that, if you go back to the apex method.js, you can see that this particular class is being referenced at 5 different places, and the contact is being referenced at 2 different places. Let us click on, say, these references, and you can peep into the code where it is used. Now it is used at some location here in my handle load method. Okay, so I can click directly here and it will take me to the exact handle load method get contact list where the contacts is being used. So you can easily peek into the code and you can see wherever the code is referenced by using the code lengths. The next thing we are going to see here is folding. If you go back to your source code and see any of your HTML or JavaScript file, so you have nested structure. It will be easy for us to look into the code if there is a possibility of folding, and I cannot see any folding here. So let's go ahead and click settings and type folding, and here you can select editor folding. Once you do that and go back to the apex imperative method.html, here if you go to the left side column, you can see the folding. So you can in fact fold everything or a particular method, and you can easily read through the code. So this is one tip with which you can control the look and feel of your code. And the third one is light bulb. So if there is an error, you can see a light bulb, or if there is an exception, you can see a light bulb on the left side that can be controlled by using the light bulb option. So you can search for, say, bulb, and you have light bulb, which is currently enabled for me. So if it is disabled, you will not be able to see those light bulbs. And what is the next tip then? You can also enable format on save and paste. Now what happens when we make the changes to this file? This really looks good. Let me do one thing. Let me press a tab. So I'm distorting my file so that it really doesn't look good. So yep, and when I save this file, what happens? The file saves as it is, and it is really difficult to read this file, right? So what you can do is you can go to the settings and you can search for format on save. Okay, so when you search for format, you have two options. Whenever you save the file, it should automatically format. Whenever you paste some code, it should automatically format. You can also enable format on paste. Now let's go back, and now let's take the same file and let us save it. It automatically formats. It helps, right? You need not really worry about formatting. You just worry about the business logic and keep typing and save it. It automatically formats for you. And next tip is you can use the emits for HTML and CSS. In our very first demo, I showed how to use the emits. There we have used the unordered list, which has 5 list item elements. You can do that here as well. And the next important tip is you can use the code snippets wherever possible. Maybe you are working on the Apex class or you are working with the JavaScript class, you can use the respective code snippets. Now let me go and show you one of the code snippets. For instance, let us open a Apex class. So I'll go to classes. Let us open account controller.class. Here I want to create a new method. Say I want to create a new method. How do I create it? So I can write the complete syntax, or I can open the command palette and say snippet. So you have an option called insert snippet, which if you click, it gives the various options, whether you want to create aura enabled method, or you want to create a false assertion, or you want to create an exception class, so on and so forth. Now let us say aura enabled method, and here you can see that it creates a skeletal structure for you, where you can fill in all the information. I can give some name like say get contact, and then I can write the logic. I'm just pressing the tabs and my complete code is available. So similarly, you can go and create a snippet even in your JavaScript file. When you go and open the command palette and use insert snippet, you can see that it shows all the snippets related to the JavaScript file, where you can insert the for loop, so on so forth. And you can also insert snippets using the LWC. So when you type LWC minus, it shows all the possible snippets. You have snippet for event, you have snippet for event details and event listeners, so on so forth. Not only that, if you want, you can also create your own custom snippets. So these snippets are available. Maybe for instance, you want to create a custom snippet for the iteration in the HTML file, okay, the for directive, you can do that. Or maybe you want to create a custom snippet for your meta file, meta.xml file. So every time I create a lighting web component, I'll have to type these things. Maybe I'll copy, paste and stuff. What I can do is I can create my own custom snippet so that I can use that snippet whenever I want to do something here. So for that, you can go to the preferences, code, preferences and user snippets, where you can create a custom snippet file for your purposes. In this case, I want to create a snippet for my XML files. So I can go to user snippets and then I can open xml.json. So as I said, we can create the custom snippets for the Apex. We can create custom snippets for the HTML, JavaScript or JSON file or even the XML file. So let's say XML file. So whenever you're opening the custom snippet file for the very first time, you see something like this, where everything is commented, but you have an example which you can use to create the snippet. And it also gives a description like how to create the snippet. So it says you can use this XML snippets here. You can place all your snippets in this file that we know already, and each snippet is defined under a snippet name. You can give a name for the snippet and has a prefix, body and description. So if you see this example, you have a snippet name, you have a prefix, you have a body and you have a description. And prefix is what is used to trigger the snippet, and the body will be expanded and inserted whenever you want to use it. And you can also put the variables, possible variables, with the tab stops like $0, $1, $2. While $1, $2 are the first position, second position, so on and so forth, while $0 is the final cursor position. So let's quickly create a snippet. What I will do here is, to make this thing simple, I'll just copy this example and paste it here. I'll remove all these comments. So in fact, I can use my shortcuts. What I'll do is I'll click this, I'll select option and I'll do a multi cursor select. Okay, and I can remove all these things. My comments are gone. Okay, let's give a name for this snippet. Let's call it as, say, LWC targets. I want to create a targets there. So I can say LWC targets. I'll give some name for my snippet. Prefix. How do I invoke my LWC targets? I will use something like LWC minus targets. Again, it's your choice, but you can use LWC minus targets because all our LWC snippets starts with LWC minus. And in order to create the body, what I will do is I will copy paste the code from one of my XML files. So this targets basically has everything. In fact, you can create a separate one for each of those things. We'll optimize. I probably will cover the custom snippets in a separate session in much more detail. For now, I'll just copy that here. Okay, which has like targets, and you can see that everything is in double quotes and put a comma. So what I can do is I can put a double quotes here and comma, and double quotes here and comma. So double quotes let me not forget commas here. I'll put a comma here, and also I will put a double quote here, and I also put a double quote for this one as well. Okay, so I put the double quotes for all those things, and here I just want to put some indentation so that it will be nice when it prints there. And yeah, I think it looks good. So description, we can say it's going to create a target. So I can say target tag. Okay, let us save it. And if you want, instead of this space, I can say /t, which really helps because it's not accepting the space there. We can use the tab. This makes sense. /t. Fine, I have this. Yeah, let us save this. I still see one more error here. That is because I forgot the comma. And let us save this. Now when I go create a new component, let us create a new lightning web component. Create lightning web component. Let us call it as, say, my component, and let's use the default. Now it has created a XML file. We can navigate to the HTML file, and we go to the meta file. Here I want to create the targets. So what I can do here is I can use LWC minus, and there you go. You can see your custom snippet. So when I say LWC targets, it automatically fills that information for me. So you can create your own custom snippets so that all the repetitive code can be easily be embedded whenever you want. So that's all about the code snippets. What next? You can leverage the SOQL language server. Now with the latest versions, you can get all your object definitions. It's also made mandatory. Whenever you create your scratch org, it shows a pop-up message to populate your object information. And once you're done that, you can use the SOQL language server to create your SOQL query. So here, if you go back, let me close all these files. Let us say a Apex file. Let me open the Apex file. Here I can in fact start writing the SOQL query. I can say select and when I say tab, you can see that it gives me a skeletal structure where I can select account, contact, whatever, and then press tab and fill the fields that I want to get from that contact and things. So you can use the SOQL language server and leverage while you write the code. So that completes the coding tips. So let's see the next set of tips. Now we'll see the tips for unit test and debugging. One of my favorite tips is code coverage. The reason being, we all know that Apex needs 75% of code coverage. How do we know that? For which classes the test classes have been implemented? To see that, we can set up the code coverage, and it will be very helpful to understand that. Here I am in Visual Studio Code, where I have clicked on beacon icon, and here you can see the Apex tests and also LWC tests. Apex tests are written using the Apex programming language, while LWC tests are written using the Jest framework, the JavaScript programming language. Now let's see how we can establish the code coverage for Apex tests. Before that, let's run one of the tests and see how the output looks like. Okay, so the tests have run successfully. And if you see here, let me maximize this. If you see here, you can see the test results, and it doesn't show any kind of code coverage. So what we'll do here is, let's go ahead and open the settings.xml file, which you can do it by going to the preferences, code preferences and settings.xml, or by using the command comma shortcut key or control comma shortcut key in Windows. Now if you see here, I've opened the settings file, and then let us search for, say, code coverage. And here you can enable the code coverage on load for the Jest framework, that is for the Lightning Web Components. And here you can enable retrieve test code coverage for the Apex. So you can click this and that will be enabled. And one more important point I want to mention here is you can change the settings in the settings file here, or you can also change it in the JSON format. When you click this icon, the equivalent JSON file will be opened. So it's your choice the way you want to change it. Okay, now that I've set up the code coverage, let's go back, let's refresh this and run this test once again and see the results. Let's examine the results once the test is completed. So currently the test is still running. Now that the test is completed, if you go down and see the results, you have the code coverage as well. So it shows the test run coverage is 50%. Okay, so what's wrong? What is the class or method that we have not yet implemented? We can see that currently we are checking for the account controller. So what we'll do is we'll go back here and open the account controller, and let's see what is not implemented. To do that, let us also open the test account controller.class where we have get account list. So what we can do is once the code coverage tool is run, on the bottom you can see an icon which says highlight Apex code coverage. When you click this and go back to the account controller.class, you can see that this part of code is covered. It shows in green highlight, and this part of the code is not covered. So we have implemented the test class for get account list. If you see the test controller class, we have implemented for this, but we haven't implemented for the get single account. So let's go ahead and implement that for get single account. So for saving some time, I've already written that code elsewhere, and let me simply copy paste that code here. Okay, I've written a get single account. Now let us save this, let us refresh and run this test account controller once again. So Apex test ran successfully. Let's go ahead and see the results down, and now you can see that the test run coverage is 100%, which means you can go here, and when you select that and open account controller.class, now you can see both in green color. So you have the complete code coverage. So it's very easy to implement the test classes, easy to identify and implement the test classes for code coverage. So what's next step? You can debug the application using different strategies. Maybe you can debug it using by putting debug statements and examining the debug log. That's one option. Or if it is a paid org, then you can use the interactive debugger. But my choice is Apex Replay Debugger, where you can run the debugging on the logs. So you can get the logs and then run the Apex Replay Debugger. We have a very nice Trailhead module. You can go through that and see how we can use the Apex Replay Debugger. Okay, that's all about unit testing and debugging. And now what are we going to see? We are going to see the source repository. Working with the repository is even more easier with Visual Studio Code now. You can create the project by cloning the repository. You can create and publish the branch from the Visual Studio Code itself. You can always work on a feature branch, which is a best practice. Never work on the master directly because that can spoil the things. So create a feature branch which you can do directly from your Visual Studio Code environment and run it. And then you can also leverage the diff tool. So I will try to cover few of the things, but I've covered most of the things about the source repository in my earlier session called Simplified Development Using Modern Tools, where I've showcased the end-to-end use case where I showed every possibility of the repository. Now let me show you a few things here. If you open a fresh project, right, you can either open the folder if the source code is locally available, or you can clone the repository where you can just copy the clone URL and it is going to create the folder structure for you. And then the next thing is you can create and publish the branch from the Visual Studio Code. So once you have the things here, you can click on this icon, which is the GitHub repository in this case, and here at the bottom you can see the master branch. I can easily switch the branch. I can click on master branch, and then from here I can create a new branch, or I can create a new branch from any of the existing branches, or I can simply switch to a specific branch. Not only that, I can see that the files are the modified files and the files which are untracked. So I can add these things. If I click on this plus sign, it will be staged. And then once it is staged, I can put the commit message here. And when I click this tick mark, it is going to commit. And I can also push the changes. So if I click this three dots here, you can see a new menu here, which is refined in the recent past, where you can do all kinds of GitHub operations, whether it's all about pushing or pulling the changes or creating the branch or even publishing the branch and all. Okay, and one of my favorite things which I want to specifically cover here in this session is Git lens. With Git lens, you can see the Git blame. You can see who has changed the file and when. So how do you enable that? You can install the Git lens. You can go to the marketplace and search for Git lens. And yeah, spelling mistake. Okay, you can install the Git lens from here. I've already installed, and I'll show you how to use it. So I'm in the activity bar. On the activity bar also you can hide these icons or show the icons whenever you want. When I right click, I can see all the extensions that I have already installed. Let me select Git lens. Once I select Git lens, you can see that for this account controller class, some changes were made by Peter Chittim, and then Christoph also has made his first commit for this file. So you can see the file history. Not only that, you can go ahead and open the settings here and search for Git lens. And here you can see that there are different options. You can enable this Git lens, others enabled, and lens enabled, and then inside single line symbols also if you enable the Git lens. Okay, and even recent changes can also be enabled if you want. And if you go here, now you can see that who changed this file and when. It says two others changed this file, and you can see when those files were changed and what are the changes that were committed by those others at that particular time. So you can see the complete information or the history of your file using the Git lens. So it is one of my favorite extension which you can install and enable. Okay, what next? So next we have the Sandbox and production and the Salesforce DX. So one tip I want to give here is you learn one single command, Salesforce DX. That's it. It's one word. Once you learn that, you can do a lot of things. If you go back here, let me open the terminal and let me maximize it. Let me also close the Explorer. Here, if I type SFDX, this is the only command I need to learn. When I press SFDX, it is going to show the complete help. And now you can see that the SFDX command is reorganized. It has topics and it has alias, config, evergreen, force, and plugins. And there are some commands like autocomplete. Now, if you have observed me typing the commands, I am simply saying SFDX and typing a part of command and pressing tab. Okay, I can say org and press tab. It shows all the possibilities here. And similarly, I can also see the options. Let me say org : open, right? And then if I put a hyphen here and press the tab, it shows all the options for that. How is this possible? So what you can do is you can run the SFDX command and you can run this autocomplete. It shows how you can enable the autocomplete. It shows all the steps. So if you follow these 2 steps, your autocomplete command is ready for you and you can start using it. So this is one command I like. And the other 2 tips I want to talk about is the convert command. You can always use the SFDX force source convert to convert your Salesforce DX project structure into metadata API project structure. Similarly, you can convert from metadata API project structure to Salesforce DX project structure using force:\md API command. That's all. Before we conclude, I want to show you some more miscellaneous extensions. One is bracket pair colorizer. If we go back to Visual Studio Code, here I'm in a JavaScript file and you can see each of these brackets are marked in different color. When you select a particular bracket, it shows the color as well as the line, L-shaped line. So you can easily identify the blocks that are there in your JavaScript file or the Java file. It's not only helpful for the JavaScript or Salesforce developer, it is helpful for any other developer as well. And the other extension which I like most is Code Tour. So we have implemented the Code Tour concept in our sample gallery as well. You can refer to one of our sample applications, VF2 LWC recipes, where we have used the Code Tour. Code Tour is one of the extension with which you can define a kind of macro within your code, a step-by-step introduction to the code, so that if any person or a member who joins newly in your team can also get acquainted to the code very fast and ramp up. Last but not the least is live share. This is one extension which we use a lot, especially for the webinars. When we are doing a webinar collaborating with some other developer or a specialist, so we share the Visual Studio Code environment using the live share feature. So here you can do the pair programming, you can collaborate with your team member while he can also code, you can also code, both of you can work on the same source code. With that said, where to go next? So we have created a bit.ly link for you here. We are also putting it in the chatter window there, and it leads to a trail mix where we provide all those resources that are required for you to learn more tips about Visual Studio Code and stuff. And even if you miss this URL, that's just fine. You can search for the trail mix by the name of our session. With that said, thank you so much for your patience and attending this session today, and see you sometime later in some other session. Until then, bye.